he had made a threat to shoot up a school bus and pick off the kiddies one by one.
December of 1968, David Faraday took Betty Lou Jensen out on their first date. Hi, I'm Mike Connors. The two high school students made a fateful choice that night. They went to park in the secluded hills around Benicia, California. As they sat in Faraday's station wagon, another car pulled alongside. A man emerged and began blasting a handgun into the driver's door of Faraday's car, forcing the two kids out of the passenger side.
He reached his gun through the window and shot David as he exited, and Betty Lou was running toward Benicia when he shot her some 26 feet away, 5 times.
Darlene Ferrin, a 22-year-old waitress, was the next victim. She lived nearby in Vallejo, California, and had gone out with her friend Mike McGough on the night of July 4th, 1969. They were cruising around Vallejo when a car chased them out of town and cornered them.
And then suddenly the door flings open, and this crew-cutted man with glasses, a rather pronounced stomach, gets out shining a light into their eyes. They're totally blinded. And Mike had reached for his wallet almost as if he thought it was some sort of policeman. And he fired bullets into the car. And the bullets passed through Mike, who was very badly wounded. He had extensive surgery, but Darlene was killed. He survived.
The killer now sent letters to 3 newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. They were the beginning of a flood of written evidence he would pour forth in the years to come. He gave himself a name, Zodiac, and a unique symbol with which he signed each letter. He also baffled the police with a complex 3-part cipher, one piece of which he sent to each newspaper.
In this particular code, the Zodiac used what we refer to as a common letter numeral substitution code, where you might substitute the letter C for E and A for B and et cetera and et cetera. And coupled with that, he used some symbols that you might describe as being something like semaphore flags, where he'd take a square and color in half of it diagonally. Or he used some Greek symbols.
The published codes stumped hundreds of amateur cryptographers and several intelligence agencies.
And finally, Donald Hardin and his wife, who just simply sat down and through sheer stick-to-itiveness worked round the clock. And they were the only ones, the CIA, Naval Intelligence, none of these people were able to crack this 3-cipher code. And this was, certainly for his wife, the very first attempt at any sort of cryptography. For Don Hardin, I think he'd done crossword puzzles. He had some various books on cipher. But what they had begun to do is they looked for a double combination of symbols, the most common being a double L. And Mrs. Hardin thought that he would use the word kill. And so once they figured the word killing or kill was somewhere, and those were double L's that they were seeing throughout these ciphers, that eventually gave them a key to break it.
It said something about this is a Zodiac speaking, something about collecting slaves, and those that he did collect would be his slaves in the afterlife, and he liked hunting people rather than animals because people were the most challenging of all, I guess, to hunt, and that we would never catch him because he was too smart for us.
Zodiac next struck at Tranquil Lake Berryessa, where Brian Hartnell was taking time out from college to relax with his friend Cecilia Shepard.
She looked up, and she saw a man, and he was approaching them. She turned to talk to her boyfriend, Brian, and when she looked up again, he was gone. Black hood which is like a medieval executioner, came down over his shoulder with a white cross circle on it.
Zodiac stabbed Brian Hartnell, I believe, 5 or 6 times. And Brian was on his knees on the blanket at the time, and he fell over, and the only thing that saved his life was he feigned death. He pretended he was dead. And then the Zodiac turned his attack on Cecilia Shepard, and he stabbed her 10 times, 5 times in the back and 5 times in the chest.
Most chilling of all was what the police found on the door of Hartnell's car. A list of Zodiac's murders by date, location, and weapon. It was signed with his symbol, the crossed circle.
The Napa Police Department had received a call through the operator, and the male voice on the phone said, I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. You'll find them 2 miles north of Park headquarters. They were driving a white Carmen Ghia. And the dispatcher then at the police department said, who are you? And he said, I'm the one that did it. And then the dispatcher knew that the phone was not hung up. It just went silent. And just minutes later, one of the officers said that he had discovered a phone off the hook at this car wash, which was only 5 or 6 blocks from the Napa Police Department.
The Zodiac killer's pattern. He was attacking young couples in suburban San Francisco towns. But what Zodiac really wanted and had not yet received was massive public attention. 29-year-old Paul Stine became the killer's next sacrifice for fame.
I think he wanted more press, and I think he went to an area which would give it to him. And so he came next to San Francisco.
Paul Stine, the driver for Yellow Cab in San Francisco, had picked up a fare in downtown San Francisco, and somewhere en route to the Sunset District, the fare asked him to stop at a certain location, and at that time the Zodiac killer had shot the cab driver.
He killed this driver mainly to get his shirt. What he was after was something to send with his letters that would prove each time that he was the killer. And unknown to the killer, he was seen by a group of teenagers across the street who were having a party, who phoned the police.
The individual I saw that night was a white male adult, approximately 35 to 45 years of age, 5 feet 10 inches tall, 180 to 210 pounds.
Fortunately, as I was told, they were looking for a black man. They had been given wrong information on the phone.
Since we were looking for a Negro male adult, we proceeded on Jackson Street towards Arguello, continuing our search.
He claimed later in a letter that he had been watching the whole time. He'd seen everything they'd done.
As we arrived at Arguello Street, the description of the suspect was changed to a white male adult. Believing that this suspect was possibly the one involved in the shooting, we entered the Presidio of San Francisco and conducted a search on West Pacific Avenue, the opposite side of the wall, in the last direction that we observed the suspect going. Did not find the suspect.
And 2 days later, the Chronicle, where I worked then, received a letter from the Zodiac. The envelope was open. It was addressed through the editor, and it was like a letter to the editor. And the secretary who handled that correspondence opened the envelope, saw this blood-stained shirt, and read the letter and rushed it into the executives at the paper, and the police were immediately notified.
And they realized at this point that their San Francisco murder was linked to this series of couples being killed in the North Bay.
Reveling in the widespread publicity, Zodiac stepped up his campaign of terror. At one point, he threatened to shoot out the tires on a school bus and pick off the children one by one.
For a period of probably a month, people were riding, deputy sheriffs and highway patrolmen were either riding on or following school buses. Drivers were issued memoranda to you know, if somebody shoots out your tire, don't stop, keep driving. So there was a great panic.
The killer sent a diagram for an explosive device that was in the hillsides around Napa. And this was working on an electric eye system where everything else could pass, but a school bus would set this bomb off.
Zodiac never did attack a school bus, but he continued to send a stream of letters and ciphers to the newspapers, taunting the police with threats of future mayhem.
I didn't want anybody else to suffer or be killed, because even though we did get a little bit more data on the suspect every time he would communicate with us or commit a crime, it's a horrible price to pay for intelligence information, the death of another person.
In November of 1969, in one of his correspondence to the Chronicle, he said that from that point on, he was not going to announce each individual killing. And so from that point on, all we received in letters were numbers. He would put the Zodiac symbol, and then he'd put a new number, 14, 18, 23, and SFPD 0. In other words, he was ahead in the score. So we don't really know how many people he, in fact, actually killed.
The cab driver killing in 1969 was Zodiac's last known murder. He continued to write his taunting letters for at least 5 more years, always hinting at new murders, but never naming the victims. In October of 1970, Zodiac focused his unwanted attention on Paul Avery, the reporter who had written many of the articles about him.
The 2 homicide inspectors who were working the Zodiac case came in and tapped me on the shoulder and pulled me outside and said, we've received another letter from the Zodiac, and it was addressed to you. It was a Halloween card. It was interpreted as being a threat to me. At that point, he had been claiming 13 victims. This one mentioned 14, and the presumption was that either he had killed 14 people at that point, and maybe I was number 15, or maybe I was supposed to be number 14.
The search for the killer reached monumental proportions during the period from 1969 to 1974. Often, the police grasped desperately for clues.
It was one of the great manhunts of all time. They called in psycholinguistics experts like Murray Myron. They called in code breakers, and probably 2,500 suspects by the end of the time. Dealt with Napa, Vallejo police, San Francisco police, the FBI. They had Zodiac conferences. The Attorney General's office prepared a confidential document which listed all the known information, which listed possibly as many as 50 victims.
Another person that has a theory that all of this dwells from Mount Diablo, a mountain about 30 miles out of Vallejo, and they've drawn radiuses off of Mount Diablo, and this killer lines up people in these radiuses and does the killings there. That's never panned out either.
At one point, I received a phone call from Anton LaVey, who was the founder and the high priest of the Church of Satan. And this was, which was very big in the late 60s and early 1970s. He thought that one of his parishioners, one of his members, might be the Zodiac killer. And he provided me with some material. I mean, the Zodiac killer was so bad that even the Church of Satan didn't want him.
It was just the multitude of information coming from all different locations. People calling into us, calling into other police departments, and people were going every different direction. And there was nothing computerized at the time. We had no central depository for any of these reports.
Throughout the manhunt, Zodiac continued to send letters and ciphers, teasing and goading his pursuers.
Every time the Zodiac would send us a letter, we were spurred on because we gleaned a little bit of intelligence information out of every letter that he sent us. And we just hoped that we could latch on to one little thing that might might lead us to the Zodiac killer. We knew an awful lot about this killer.
One of his letters quoted the Gilbert and Sullivan stage play The Mikado. Either Zodiac was a theater fan or he went out of his way to throw the police off the track.
Also, his reference to silent movies was kind of an oddity in itself. Not everybody is infatuated with silent movies like the Zodiac was. Those are some things that we took serious look at when we're looking at our suspects.
The killer has never been caught, but thousands of suspects fit the profile. Many were eliminated through a phone call or background check, but some have been investigated more thoroughly. Richard Marshall was one of many who shared characteristics with Zodiac and was questioned by police.
I must have a double floating around. I hope the poor guy doesn't look like me, but the fact is that the characteristics you just mentioned fit me almost to a T. I really am startled at the mass and accuracy of the detail. And obviously, if they had been that forthcoming about that at the time, I would have understood why they were investigating me. My innocence notwithstanding, the details do fit.
As the years passed and the facts grew stale, the number of Zodiac suspects dwindled. Eventually, the torrent of letters dried up too.
Towards the end, I don't know if we were getting some letters that turned out not to be authentic Zodiac letters, and I believe the last time we heard from him with an authenticated letter was in April of 1974.
But in 1978, April 25th, I believe, we got a letter that says, "I am back with you. I've never been anywhere else. You know, I've been with you all this time."
Today, Zodiac is still a source of confusion. Now, did he write his last letter in 1974 or in 1978? Has the killer himself died, or is he alive somewhere?
This man collected, like from the kids that he killed, he attacked out at Lake Berryessa, he took wallets, souvenirs. There were always something. And I think if this man had died, I think he would have left one last letter. I think he would have found these bits and pieces of the Zodiac's career.
And that, of course, becomes the prime mystery of it all, is not only who is the Zodiac killer, but what happened to him. And there are people that think they know, but I don't think anybody can say for sure. There are innumerable possibilities. He died a natural death, he died a violent death, he committed suicide, he's in prison, he's in a mental institution, he got cured and just stopped killing, he got religion and is a street preacher. It could be anything.
Now, whether Zodiac is alive or dead, in prison or in an asylum, he continues to haunt his pursuers. They can never forget him, never relax, until they know his identity and his fate. To this day, the police still keep track of certain people.
We don't want to call them suspects at all, but we like to keep an eye on where they're residing at. This does not mean that we watch their house or anything like that, but we just try to keep an eye on where they are. So in case another killing should occur, we'd be able to contact them and find out if, in fact, they had anything to do with that particular killing.
There was something about this case that was different. And it became, I think, a battle, you know, a chess game between the killer and people like Captain Narlow of Napa, who were highly intelligent police officers who really did their best.
I'd be working on a different case entirely and maybe driving through a community and I'd just stop and think, you know, I wonder how close I got to that guy.
It took over some people's lives. I tried very hard not to let it take over my life, but here we are, you know, 20 years later, and I'm being interviewed about it because of my association with the case.
I became obsessed with this case. It certainly changed me as a person. I'm not the same person now that I was then.
At some point in time, we will probably catch the Zodiac. Or at least learn his identity. I think you just have too many agencies working on it, too many people talking about it. A person like this isn't going to keep this quiet all to himself all his life. I think it ultimately will be solved. I don't think it'll be a Jack the Ripper.
I wish somebody would catch this guy, even today. I don't care who it is, just somebody catch him.